I'm going to start here. Angel Reese wants credit. She's not getting enough credit. She did this too. She taunted Caitlin Clark. She made this whole thing. The reason why WNBA is up is because of Angel Reese.
Have you heard Jason Whitlock's recent remarks regarding Angel Reese? He not only disagreed with her, but he also fully revealed the financial fallacy underlying her demands for more money, while Reese and Carrington are threatening to sit out if they don't receive a rise, neglecting a serious issue.
I went from liking Angel Reese a little bit to now I don't like Angel Reese. I'm back to she's just bad news.
That's correct. The WNBA loses $30 million annually. Whitlock recently called out their entire plan, claiming that they are playing checkers in a game of chess. Is this the most out-of-touch demand in sports history? The league from which these players are asking more money is losing money.
And, she's fallen right in line with the rest of the WNBA. She's just an angry feminist.
If you believe that Angel Reese's requests are reasonable, wait until you hear what Jason Whitlock has said on the NBA's financial status. Reese and her fellow players are calling for larger contracts and greater compensation. In addition to disagreeing with Whitlock revealed the unsettling reality that most basketball fans are unaware of about women's professional basketball, which totally blows their argument apart.
They have a sit-down on Angel Reese's podcast and start talking about the money they want and what the WNBA is planning. If they don't get there, the players don't get their money.
When Angel discusses on her podcast that WNBA players should receive higher compensation, Whitlock highlights a harsh fact. The league has been losing money for years. We're not talking about minor losses either. The WNBA loses about $30 million annually. Take a moment to consider that a league that is losing money at that rate is somehow dealing with players who want larger paychecks.
This kind of talk, and they're not talking about this season, they're talking about next season, their collective bargaining agreement. This is a league that averages losing $25–30 million a year.
The most brutal part of Whitlock's assessment was that, given the WNBA's dire financial circumstances, he suggested that instead of demanding more money, these athletes should actually be paying to play. Can you imagine any other professional athlete being told they should pay for the privilege of playing? That's how bad Whitlock believes the situation is. Whitlock didn't pull any punches. In essence, he said these players are displaying unprecedented levels of entitlement while competing in a league that can't even financially support itself.
And these women are talking about, if we don't get what we want, if we don't get what we deserve, if you got what you deserve, you'd be paying to play in the WNBA.
Whitlock's analysis is particularly potent because it highlights the inherent discrepancy between these players' perceptions of their own value and the hard realities of business, even as and others discuss their leverage and worth. According to Whitlock, the only statistic that really matters in this discussion is the $25–30 million annual loss figure. How can you demand a larger piece of a pie that doesn't really exist?
NBA, but to be fair, and you're right about that, silence is golden, and sometimes less is more when it comes to players talking and using their platform and getting out their message.
Whitlock's response to Reese's specific threat to skip games if their compensation demands weren't satisfied was particularly intriguing. He essentially challenged her to carry out the threat because he knew it would have no bearing on the league's performance or viewership.
I wonder, though, if the average WNBA player that none of us knows is actually saying, hey, Angel, would you shut the f*** up? Seriously. Because this does not help the perception of the league.
Whitlock's contemptuous response goes beyond simply calling Reese's bluff. It also signals a straight, icy catastrophe taking place in real time. According to Whitlock, fans' perceptions of today's athletes are being drastically altered, and not in a positive way, by their constant social media presence and never-ending podcasts. We are witnessing these WNBA stars sabotage themselves, tweet by tweet and podcast by podcast.
Steve, when I watched that video, overexposure, one of the main thoughts that goes through my head is just like,
have you noticed that these days, almost every player has a microphone in their face? Whitlock called this up explicitly, stating that everyone has a podcast, is always being interviewed, and is putting themselves out there without realizing it. It's as if they are voluntarily erasing the mystique that formerly distinguished sports stars.
just overexposure. Everybody's got a podcast. Everybody is getting interviewed nonstop. Everybody's putting themselves out there, and they don't understand they're harming themselves.
Simply too much exposure. Whitlock points out a basic strategic mistake when he claims that Angel Reese is playing checkers in a game of chess. These players are broadcasting every idea, complaint, and demand to the world without thinking about the consequences. Everyone has a podcast, everyone is constantly being interviewed, and they're putting themselves out there without realizing they are hurting themselves.
That we're getting too much exposure to Angel Reese and Dejanay Carrington and the rest of these players. And so athletes from previous generations that didn't have podcasts, didn't have social media.
Consider it. In earlier generations, we seldom knew anything about our favorite players outside of how well they played on the court. For example, Michael wasn't sharing his opinions on league rules or providing regular updates about his contract negotiations.
They had the advantage of, we didn't know much about them. We didn't know how greedy, entitled, stupid, we didn't know because they weren't overexposed.
Did you hear Whitlock make the same claim, stating that athletes from earlier times profited because we were unaware of how entitled, greedy, and foolish they weren't? Overexposed. Players today are exposing aspects of themselves that fans may not want to see when they frequently appear on podcasts and social media. The short-sightedness and lack of strategic thinking.
These guys are overexposed and they're playing a game of checkers in a game of chess.
The Reese and Carrington podcast exchange is the ideal illustration of this issue because by openly discussing strike plans and wage demands, they are reaching out to everyone, including league executives and supporters who might not support their cause. In addition, they may be causing division within their own ranks.
Anyway, this is just a bad look for the WNBA. Angel Reese just wants content for her podcast. She's playing checkers in a game of chess.
What are the thoughts of other WNBA players at this moment? Many of them are undoubtedly wondering, Angel, would you shut up every time Reese speaks out about these issues? As Whitlock has implied. She might be harming the league's reputation and making it more difficult for all players to win over the public to improved conditions.
But to be fair to the rest of that league, I wonder how many other women are thinking, hey, Angel, be quiet. Be quiet. You make a lot of other money doing other things. We actually like this job and need this job. We're all working for a vision. Don't ruin it for the rest of us.
Speaking of players who could be wondering, Angel, would you shut up? Whitlock quickly focused on the obvious omission in Reese and Carrington's entire leverage discussion, asking how it is possible to analyze WNBA player value for an entire podcast without ever saying the name. Caitlin Clark.
And if I'm an average, everyday WNBA player who appreciates what we have, I'm thinking, would you just be quiet? Seriously.
Whitlock didn't allow this well-planned silence to pass, without pointing out that the two players who are most openly hostile to Clark managed to have a thorough discussion about league leverage while utterly avoiding the topic of the player who is generating the most interest in women's basketball.
It's funny that the two people having this conversation are two people that absolutely hate Caitlin Clark and are jealous of Caitlin Clark.
You see, Whitlock did more than just point out this omission. He also emphasized the truth about Reese and Carrington's true motivations. It's no coincidence, he explained, that the two players who are most antagonistic towards Caitlin Clark are the ones who are planning a work stoppage while Rhea is out there threatening to strike and demanding more money. Clark is quietly working hard and letting her game speak for itself. Whitlock noticed this sharp contrast and commended Clark's strategy while criticizing Reese's incessant need for attention.
And couldn't think to say during this entire deal, like, because of the leverage that Caitlin Clark has given us, we may actually get paid more than what we deserve.
However, Whitlock didn't simply make statements. He supported them with verifiable data. Have you looked at the WNBA attendance stats for games with Clark and those without her? The difference is astounding. When Clark plays for the Indiana Fever, attendance increases dramatically, sometimes tripling or quadrupling typical numbers, while games without her frequently revert to the league's historically low attendance numbers. Indiana Fever games are selling out arenas nationwide, and ticket prices are skyrocketing to levels never seen in the WNBA.
Because it's all Caitlin Clark, but instead you have two very delusional people. Oh, we deserve this. We blah, blah, blah.
We? Yeah, we? We!
Whitlock didn't hold back when discussing the implications of this. Reese and Carrington refused to acknowledge the source of their newfound leverage, effectively riding Clark's coattails while refusing to give her credit. He claimed that one player, Caitlin Clark, is responsible for 90% of the renewed interest in the WNBA, and that her arrival has changed the league's visibility and marketability on her own.
What did they lose? I think 29 million last year. They're saying they lost.
Well, that's an improvement.
Maybe it's 50.
Well,
yeah, maybe it was 50 million. It's been 29 straight years of losing money.
What do you think would happen to the WNBA if Clark weren't involved? Whitlock revealed this harsh reality that dispels any misconception about who actually holds the power. Without Clark influencing media attention and viewership, Reese and everyone else would have no leverage to demand higher salaries, and the league would merely revert to its pre-Clark state. Due to financial difficulties, Reese's threats are wholly baseless.
Second, we haven't heard anything from Caitlin. She's just gotten to work. Just gotten to work in the offseason.
Yeah, she doesn't have to run her mouth for attention. She can actually let her play on the court run her mouth for her.
Whitlock should be horrified by his warning about what would happen if WNBA players went on strike. Unlike well-established sports leagues with decades of devoted fan bases, the WNBA is treading carefully with its recent surge in popularity, and Angel Reese and others are threatening to halt work. Whitlock states unequivocally that work stoppages will annoy fans and have a long-lasting effect. He is not merely speculating that he has already seen this film.
And I'm telling you, they do have obvious leverage because of Caitlin Clark and because of, the momentum that women's basketball does have.
Remember the 1994 pound strike that almost instantly destroyed baseball's appeal? The sport had to rely on the steroid-fueled home run battle between Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire to win back fans. But here is the key distinction. Whitlock notes that while baseball has decades of ingrained cultural significance to rely on, the WNBA lacks that luxury and has just experienced months of true popular momentum, mostly as a result of one rookie.
Even understand the history. What happened to Major League Baseball in 1994? Work stoppages will irritate fans, and there will be lasting impact from that. These guys had to steroid up and hit a bunch of home runs in order to get those fans back.
The timing of strike talk couldn't be worse. Players are threatening to take the ball and leave, just when casual sports fans are finally giving women's basketball a chance. Whitlock brutally cuts through the illusion to highlight what should be clear. Supporters aren't yet devoted to the league. Instead, they're following the Clark phenomenon.
We should just be careful. Major League Baseball, there could be a work stoppage in Major League Baseball in 2026, which, if that happened, that's more of a spotlight for the WNBA.
Consider the implications for Angel Reese's negotiating position. When she makes demands, the ground she is standing on is basically quicksand. Whitlock stresses that a work stoppage of any kind is the last thing they need, since it would sabotage the wonderful potential for women's basketball that is currently present and might disappear overnight.
And so they're going to risk ruining a good thing. The last thing they need is some sort of work stoppage.
Whitlock's analysis reveals a basic strategic mistake, which is what makes it so damaging. Players like Reese are already threatening to go on strike, despite the NBA's collective bargaining agreement not even expiring until 2027. With the league's finances still in shaky shape, these players run the risk of ruining things before they have a chance to do good.
Well, Major League Baseball has so much history that they could survive, to some degree, what they did to their reputation and their fan base.
Whitlock renders a harsh final decision. Instead of supporting themselves, these players are purposefully hurting themselves with their naive demands. The league's fragile growth is being exacerbated by their impatient demands for instant rewards that the economy cannot sustain. They are not only endangering the league's future, but also their own careers.
Daniel Podcast, WNBA players striking would be the most tone-deaf pro athlete move in history. The WNBA has never made a profit in its entire existence. Not gonna lie, I'm rooting for this to happen.
Whitlock's prediction is even more astounding than we initially believed. He's not just discussing the WNBA's current issues, he's speculating that a whole new league may emerge as a result of all of this. If the WNBA keeps losing money while players like Reese continue to demand more, Whitlock thinks that other opportunities for the best women's basketball talent may arise.
The WNBA was founded in 1996 and has never made a profit in 29 years. Question for the business gurus. Can you think of any other for-profit business in America that is 29 years old, has never made a profit, and still exists? I honestly can't. The WNBA may be the only one.
The most intriguing thing is how well this aligns with his Clark analysis. If the WNBA collapses due to financial strain, where does Clark go? She becomes the focal point of any new venture that arises. It's like Whitlock playing 3D chess. What do you think? Are we seeing the beginning of the end for the WNBA as we know it? Or will cooler heads prevail before it's too late, while others are mired in the present? Share your opinions below.